The Eastern Front in 1943 was a battlefield defined by extremes: endless plains, frozen mud, and the clash of two industrial giants. Germany's Panzerwaffe, once unstoppable, was now stretched thin against an enemy whose factories produced tanks faster than bullets could destroy them. The Soviet T-34 had become the symbol of that unstoppable tide. Fast, rugged, and simple to produce, its sloped armor and wide tracks allowed it to dominate terrain that bogged down heavier German designs. Yet despite its advantages, it was not invincible. German tank and anti-tank crews learned through bitter experience that the T-34's armor could be penetrated, but only under specific conditions. Accuracy, range estimation, and timing became matters of life and death. A single well-placed shot could change the outcome of an engagement. By 1943, this deadly precision had become an art form practiced by the best gunners of the Wehrmacht. The weapon that gave them a fighting chance was the 7.5-centimeter KWK-40 and its variants. The main gun mounted on late Panzer IVs and towed anti-tank guns like the Pak-40. Its high-velocity round could pierce up to 91 millimeters of armor at 500 meters. But those numbers were theoretical. In the chaos of battle, dust, vibration, and target movement turned those equations into guesswork. Success depended on experience and reflex, not just technology. Reports from the Eastern Front mention engagements where German gunners achieved near-miraculous results. Single rounds striking precisely at weak points, disabling or destroying T-34s instantly. These events were not accidents. They were the product of an entire system of gunnery training, optical superiority, and the brutal Darwinism of continuous combat. German optics, particularly those produced by Zeiss and Leitz, gave the Wehrmacht an edge. The TZF series telescopic sights offered clarity and magnification unmatched by most Allied equivalents. Through these lenses, a trained gunner could pick out the vulnerable points on a T-34, the lower frontal plate, the turret ring, or the thinner side armor behind the road wheels. In summer 1943, as both sides prepared for the Battle of Kursk, German gunnery manuals emphasized a single principle: one shot, one kill. The idea wasn't romantic, it was practical. Ammunition was limited. Exposure meant death. Crews learned to range targets by eye, adjust for movement, and anticipate terrain. Those who survived the early years of the war became masters of ballistic intuition. This environment, the meeting of superior optics, battle-hardened skill, and relentless Soviet armor, produced the moments that would be remembered for decades, the so-called insane shots, where one shell at the perfect angle shattered a tank that had seemed unstoppable. The key to German gunnery effectiveness was not only the weapon, but the system behind it. Each gunner in the Wehrmacht was trained with mathematical precision. In training grounds from Putlos to Ohrdruf, crews learned range estimation by silhouette and movement, adjusting for wind, elevation, and armor slope without relying on rangefinders. Soviet crews often fired by volume, a storm of shells to guarantee at least one hit. German gunners were expected to hit on the first shot. The optical sights of the KWK-40 and Pak-40 were central to this doctrine. The TZF-5F sight, for instance, featured calibrated markings that allowed range and target size estimation simultaneously. A skilled gunner could read distance by how much of the reticle the tank filled. This precision was enhanced by the flatter trajectory of German high-velocity shells, especially the PZGR-39 armor-piercing capped rounds. Traveling at 790 meters per second, they retained lethal energy at nearly 2 kilometers. Combat reports from the 3rd Panzer Division during Operation Zitadelle, record instances where gunners claimed T-34 kills at over 1,500 meters, extreme distances by the standards of 1943. Analysis later showed that these successes were the result of preparation and sight discipline rather than luck. The gunner would fire not at the broadside, but at the instant the enemy exposed its flank or climbed a ridge, reducing effective armor thickness. In the heat of the Kursk battles, tank duels became tests of who could spot, aim, and fire first. Soviet doctrine emphasized closing distance rapidly, overwhelming the enemy at 300 meters or less. German crews preferred to fight from ambush, exploiting their optics and range advantage. A stationary Panzer IV or Stu G3, well camouflaged and prepared, could devastate an entire Soviet column before its position was discovered. The one-shot kill stories that later circulated among both German and Allied historians stem from these realities. There was nothing supernatural about them, only the ruthless efficiency of men who had survived years of attrition. Their ability to judge range to within 50 meters by eye, to sense the correct moment of fire through intuition built on hundreds of engagements, was the difference between life and death. By mid-1943, the Soviets had adapted. Additional armor plating was welded to the T-34's frontal hull. The Model 1943 introduced a new hexagonal turret design, better for ricochet, worse for visibility. Yet the German guns had already evolved in response. The long-barreled KWK-40L/48 and later the Panther's 7.5-centimeter KWK-42L/70 made the T-34's sloped armor far less effective. The arms race between armor and penetration had reached its most lethal balance. Behind the technical statistics, though, lay the human factor. Gunners who achieved such accuracy were not typical soldiers. They were specialists shaped by repetition, fear, and survival. They memorized range tables, not from manuals, but from instinct. Every trigger pull carried the weight of experience, and the certainty that missing the first shot might mean death seconds later. The confrontation between German gunnery precision and Soviet mass production reached its peak in the summer of 1943. Kursk was not merely a clash of tanks, it was a laboratory for every innovation in armored warfare. The T-34 remained the workhorse of the Red Army, supported by new formations of self-propelled guns like the Su-76 and Su-122. Against them stood the reorganized German Panzer divisions, armed with improved Panzer IVs, Stu G3s, and the 1st Panthers and Tigers. German gunners entered this campaign with a specific mission: destroy as many T-34s as possible before they closed the distance. Data from the Wehrmacht's Heereswaffenamt, Army Ordnance Office, shows that at typical engagement ranges of 800 to 1,200 meters, the KWK-40L-48 could penetrate the T-34's front armor if the shot struck at an oblique angle of 30 degrees or less. A gunner who knew where and when to fire could exploit this vulnerability, aiming for the junctions between armor plates, the driver's hatch, or the turret ring. Photographic reconnaissance helped refine this precision. German analysts studied destroyed T-34s to understand where rounds struck most effectively. The results led to a standardized set of vital points printed in gunnery guides distributed to frontline units. These diagrams taught crews to fire at the side under the turret, the rear engine deck, or the track junctions. In the field, this knowledge became second nature. On the step near Orel, one after-action report from the 9th Panzer Division described a duel lasting less than 20 seconds. A Panzer IV concealed in a shallow depression spotted 3 advancing T-34s at roughly 900 meters. The gunner waited as the lead tank turned slightly, exposing its angled hull. One round was fired. Observers noted the flash, then the Soviet tank erupting in flame. The remaining T-34s turned away, only to be struck moments later by the supporting Stu G battery. The German commander later wrote that the first shot had opened the battle and decided it. Such encounters illustrated the decisive value of calm precision under pressure. The average time between target identification and firing among veteran German gunners had been reduced to under 10 seconds. They practiced loading drills until the breech closed automatically on instinct. Many used visual tricks, counting the tank's road wheels or turret shadow, to gauge distance without instruments. By late 1943, the T-34 was no longer a mystery. German intelligence had dissected captured models, measured armor angles, and charted its weaknesses. The myth of invincibility that had surrounded it in 1941 was gone. Yet the Soviets compensated with quantity, throwing hundreds of tanks into every major offensive. Precision had to face mass, and in this equation, even the most accurate gunner could not stop the tide alone. The stories of single perfect shots, the kind that split a T-34's turret from its hull, emerged from this grim calculus. They symbolized the peak of German tactical discipline, where training, optics and timing aligned for a moment that turned engineering into instinct. While tank gunners often drew attention for their accuracy, many of the most impressive one-shot kills came from towed anti-tank crews. The 7.5 centimeter PaK-40, introduced in 1942, had quickly become the backbone of German defensive firepower. Weighing nearly 1,500 kilograms, it was difficult to move but devastating when properly emplaced. Its armor-piercing capped rounds, the PZGR-39, could punch through 100 millimeters of armor at close range. On the Eastern Front, where Soviet tank attacks could arrive with little warning, these guns were positioned in overlapping fields of fire, often camouflaged in haystacks, shallow pits, or behind low ridges. When T-34s advanced, the anti-tank crews would hold fire until the lead tank entered the kill zone. Then at a signal, several guns would open up simultaneously, but it was often the first shot that determined whether the ambush succeeded or failed. German gunners learned that the key to hitting a moving T-34 lay in predicting its course. The Soviet tank, with its wide tracks and powerful diesel engine, could change direction rapidly. A good gunner didn't aim at the tank itself, but slightly ahead, calculating its next position. When the shot was fired, shell and target would meet in motion, a deadly intersection of mathematics and instinct. Field manuals emphasize the importance of aiming for weak points rather than sheer armor thickness. A hit to the driver's hatch or the lower hull could jam the transmission. A strike at the turret ring could lock the turret, effectively neutralizing the tank even if it didn't explode. The most famous targets, however, were the ammunition racks, thinly protected compartments that turned a T-34 into a fireball when pierced. Reports from the 2nd Panzerjäger Battalion near Belgorod describe an engagement in August 1943, where a single PaK-40 destroyed 3 T-34s in rapid succession. The gunner had waited for the Soviet formation to emerge from a tree line at 600 meters. His first round struck the lead tank's lower plate, immobilizing it. The second found the flank of the next tank as it tried to swerve, detonating its fuel. The third shot hit the rear tank as it turned away, entering through the engine deck. 3 shots in under a minute, the kind of precision that became legendary among German anti-tank units. Such accounts were not exaggerations, but reflections of training and discipline. PaK crews drilled relentlessly to reduce reload times. Each member of the 5-man team had a defined role. One aimed, one loaded, one spotted, one passed ammunition, and one relayed range corrections. A well-trained team could maintain a rhythm of one aim shot every 10 seconds, faster if adrenaline took over. As Soviet armor evolved and became thicker, the German focus shifted to newer weapons like the 8.8 centimeter PaK-43 and the Jagd Panther's Long 88. Yet the principle remained the same: precision through repetition, patience before firing, and exploiting every second of surprise. By the end of 1943, Soviet reports began to note that enemy gunners strike our tanks at long distances, often with the first shell. The advantage of accuracy was not merely technical, it was psychological. Crews who believed they could hit with the first shot fought with confidence. Those who doubted it fought with fear. The mental side of gunnery was as crucial as the mechanical one. By 1944, the Eastern Front had become an environment of exhaustion and calculation, where the survival of an entire crew often depended on a single man's steadiness. A gunner's world narrowed to the scope's crosshair, a small shaking circle surrounded by chaos. Through that glass, he had to translate motion into timing, judgment into precision. German training emphasized repetition until instinct replaced thought. Gunners memorized the behavior of their weapons under every condition, from frozen oil in January to blinding dust in summer. They knew how much the barrel dropped after dozens of consecutive shots, how the vibration of the engine altered the sight picture, and how wind drift changed at different ranges. At the heart of this mastery was Germany's obsession with optical engineering. Zeiss and Leit's optics gave German crews an advantage that no amount of Soviet numbers could fully erase. The clarity and magnification of their sights, typically 2.5x to 5x, allowed target identification well before the enemy spotted them. Combined with the flat trajectory of the KWK-40 or PaK-40, this meant that at distances under a kilometer, aiming corrections were minimal. a direct line between skill and destruction. The Soviet T-34, for all its strengths, had limitations in this duel. Its gun sights were simpler, with lower magnification and inferior glass quality. Visibility from the turret was poor, forcing commanders to expose themselves to direct fire. Communication was inconsistent. Many early T-34s lacked radios, relying instead on flags or hand signals. Against disciplined, coordinated German gunners, these weaknesses became fatal. In hundreds of small engagements across Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland, these conditions repeated themselves. German gunners, often operating from concealed positions, would hold fire until a T-34 formation reached between 600 and 800 meters, close enough to guarantee penetration, far enough to remain outside the effective range of the Soviet 76mm gun. A single shot, well placed, could destroy the lead vehicle and block the advance. For Soviet tankers, these moments were terrifyingly sudden. The first warning was usually the metallic crack of a high-velocity round, followed by a fireball. The T-34's sloped armor sometimes caused deflections, but when struck at weak angles, particularly near the lower hull or turret ring, the results were catastrophic. Fuel ignited, ammunition cooked off, and hatches blew open in orange flame. Yet even in these conditions, the balance of war was turning. Germany's industry was faltering, its supply of trained gunners shrinking. By mid-1944, many crews were inexperienced replacements, rushed to the front after minimal training. The veterans, the men capable of one-shot kills, were dying faster than they could be replaced. The precision that had once defined the Wehrmacht was slowly being consumed by attrition. Still, in every sector, stories persisted. Of single rounds fired at impossible ranges, of gunners who waited for the perfect shot and changed the course of small battles. These moments carried symbolic weight far beyond their tactical importance. They were proof that skill could still matter in a war increasingly dominated by numbers and machines. The continued evolution of the T-34 forced German gunners to refine their craft even further. By late 1944, the Red Army had introduced the T-34-85, armed with an 85mm gun and thicker frontal armor reaching 90mm. This improvement changed the balance of firepower. At long range, the once dominant 7.5cm KWK-40 no longer guaranteed penetration. German tank crews were compelled to aim with surgical precision or rely on more powerful guns like the 8.8cm mounted on Tigers and heavy tank destroyers. The T-34-85's new armor layout presented fewer weak spots, but those that remained were well known to veteran German gunners. The turret ring, the mantlet edge, and the junction between hull and turret became the new targets. A perfectly aimed shot to the lower frontal plate could still pierce the armor if fired from under 800 meters. At these ranges, a miss was deadly. The Soviet gun could respond in seconds with equal lethality. In many cases, the difference between life and death was no longer the weapon, but the timing. The German approach shifted toward ambush tactics refined to near-scientific precision. Anti-tank units positioned themselves behind ridges or tree lines, calculating exactly when the Soviet tanks would appear. The gunners adjusted their sights to preset ranges, waiting motionless until the target entered their field of fire. When the first tank crossed a landmark, a tree, a rock, a fence line, the order to fire was given. One report from East Prussia in early 1945 describes a single Stu-G-3 assault gun positioned at a crossroads as a Soviet armored column approached. The gunner, using a Zeiss TZF 5F1 sight, tracked the lead T-34-85 at 700 meters. He waited until it climbed a small rise, exposing its underside for a fraction of a second. The round struck the hull beneath the glacis plate, ricocheted into the ammunition racks, and detonated the tank in a plume of smoke. Within the next minute, the crew reloaded and fired again, hitting a second tank in the side turret ring, both destroyed with 2 shells. Such instances demonstrated how much the German system depended on discipline and training, even in the war's final phase. Ammunition shortages made deliberate fire essential. Wasting shells could mean being overrun. Experienced gunners learned to read the terrain as well as the enemy, understanding that the land itself could amplify their accuracy. Shooting downhill reduced barrel climb. Firing from shaded positions masked muzzle flash. Every variable was calculated, every movement rehearsed. Despite the increasing desperation of Germany's situation, many crews maintained this meticulous approach until the war's end. Reports from late 1944 onward show that the average ammunition expenditure per kill for German anti-tank units remained remarkably low, often just 2 to 3 rounds per destroyed tank. It was proof that even as the Reich collapsed, the technical and mental foundations of German gunnery remained intact. But precision could not compensate for exhaustion. Soviet offensives grew larger and faster. For every T-34 destroyed, 2 more appeared. The men who once took pride in single perfect shots now faced endless waves of steel. By the beginning of 1945, the Eastern Front had collapsed into chaos. The once coordinated German defenses were fragmented, and tank engagements became short, brutal encounters at close range. Yet even in retreat, the tradition of precision fire persisted. Veteran gunners, often commanding hastily assembled units of Panthers, Stugs, and captured vehicles, continued to prove that discipline and timing could overcome overwhelming odds, if only temporarily. In Silesia and East Prussia, terrain dictated tactics. Forests, villages, and snow-laden fields limited visibility and reduced engagement ranges to under 500 meters. Under such conditions, the first accurate shot decided the fight. The superior optics of German vehicles still offered an advantage, even as fuel shortages and broken supply lines crippled mobility. Gunners relied on stored range data and visual cues rather than instruments, firing by instinct honed over years of combat. One detailed report from February 1945 describes a Panther positioned along a narrow forest track. A Soviet column of T-34 85s approached in file formation. The gunner, operating an 8.8 centimeter KWK-43 modified from a Tiger unit, held his fire until the lead tank came into view at 400 meters. The first shot hit the driver's hatch, killing the crew instantly and blocking the road. The second round struck the next tank's turret ring as it tried to reverse. Within 45 seconds, the narrow path became an impassable wreck. The rest of the Soviet column was forced to turn back under fire from concealed positions on both flanks. Encounters like this were rare by 1945, but they illustrated how the combination of skill and preparation could still yield disproportionate results. The effectiveness of such ambushes depended not just on the gun or ammunition, but on the gunner's nerve. His ability to wait until the exact moment of exposure before firing. Too early, and the enemy would have time to react. Too late, and the gunner would be spotted and destroyed. Even as defeat loomed, the Wehrmacht's gunnery philosophy remained consistent: precision, patience, and economy. Each round was measured, every engagement was a calculation. Many gunners fought until the final days, continuing to apply the same discipline they had learned years before at training ranges in Saxony and Bavaria. Captured Soviet reports acknowledged the persistence of German accuracy, even in retreat. One document from the 1st Guards Tank Army described the extreme precision of enemy defensive fire, noting that single shots frequently disable our lead tanks. Before contact range, Soviet commanders increasingly resorted to massed artillery and smoke screens to suppress these pockets of resistance before tanks advanced. But no amount of firepower could erase the tactical reality. A well-trained gunner, equipped with clear optics and an understanding of his weapon's ballistics, could still destroy a T-34 with a single round. These final engagements, though strategically insignificant, marked the last expression of a doctrine that had defined German armored warfare since the early years of the conflict. As the Red Army crossed into German territory, the men behind the guns fought not for victory, but for survival. And yet, in countless fields and ruined towns, the echoes of their precision, one shot, one explosion, one fireball, continued to define the grim symmetry of the Eastern Front's closing battles. As Soviet forces advanced deeper into East Prussia and Pomerania, the character of armored combat changed once again. Urban terrain replaced open plains, and with it came a new challenge for both sides. Streets, rubble, and ruined buildings offered cover, but also restricted movement. In these conditions, accuracy became even more vital. A single miss could expose a gun's position or waste one of the few remaining shells available. German gunners adapted their methods to the new environment. The once carefully calculated long-range engagements of 1943 were replaced by split-second shots at 200 meters or less. Many anti-tank crews positioned themselves in basements, behind collapsed walls, or in corners of destroyed houses. They aimed not at tanks in open terrain, but at narrow street crossings or choke points where Soviet armor had no room to maneuver. The first round fired had to kill. There was rarely time for a second. Accounts from the defense of Königsberg in April 1945 describe small teams of Volkssturm and veteran Panzerjäger units using single-pack 40s or even handheld Panzerfausts with surgical accuracy. But among them were still professional gunners from Wehrmacht divisions retreating westward. One such report tells of a lone Pak 40 covering a bridge approach. The gunner waited until a T-34 attempted to cross. He fired one armor-piercing round at the front lower plate from less than 150 meters. The shell penetrated, ignited fuel, and halted the entire column behind it. The bridge was destroyed moments later, denying passage to the rest of the Soviet armor. These engagements were increasingly desperate. Ammunition was rationed, fuel nearly gone, and replacement barrels scarce. Yet the discipline that had defined German gunnery since the war's beginning persisted. Even in collapsing defense, range tables were checked, optics were cleaned, and each round was measured for quality before use. It was an attempt to maintain order in a war descending into chaos. Soviet crews, for their part, had learned as well. The T-34 advancing into Germany often carried infantry on their hulls, tank riders, to spot ambushes and neutralize anti-tank positions before they could fire. Still, a hidden gunner with a clear line of fire and the nerve to wait for the exact angle could defeat them all. One Soviet after-action report from the assault on Danzig noted that enemy gunners continue to demonstrate precision under fire, striking the first tank in column consistently, delaying our advance. The German ability to focus fire on the lead tank, blocking roads and trapping entire formations, remained one of their few enduring tactical advantages. By this stage, many gunners operated without communications, coordinating through hand signals or prearranged timings. They no longer fought for objectives. They fought to delay, to inflict one last wound before retreating or being overrun. But the legacy of their precision endured. Allied intelligence units later studied their firing methods, noting how optics, target prioritization, and psychological control contributed to effectiveness far exceeding expectations for small defensive forces. In these final urban battles, the one-shot ideal became less a tactical doctrine and more a matter of survival. Every trigger pull had to count, and those who still possessed the calm and skill to make that single decisive shot kept their comrades alive for a few moments longer in a war already lost. By April 1945, the German defensive line was collapsing on all fronts. The remnants of panzer divisions were scattered, their machines exhausted, their supply lines gone. Yet in this final stage, the precision and discipline of individual gunners stood out more starkly than ever before. Their war had been reduced to a mathematical contest. How many shells remained, how many tanks approached, how long before the inevitable end. In Berlin's outskirts and the fields of Brandenburg, tank duels occurred at ranges measured in meters, not kilometers. It was no longer about superior optics or long-distance marksmanship, but the ability to identify a target and fire first. Still, even amid ruins, the habits of trained gunners endured. The first shot remained sacred, the culmination of years of doctrine that valued perfection over volume. An example survives from the records of the Mönckeberg Panzer Division, one of the last armored formations defending Berlin. Near Seelow Heights, a Panther crew destroyed a T-34 with a single shell fired through the narrow opening of a destroyed barn. The shot struck the tank's lower glacis at 400 meters, igniting the ammunition inside. The gunner, once an instructor at a training range in Ohrdruf, later explained his success simply: "We were trained to wait. Always wait until the sight picture is perfect." In these closing battles, the precision of German gunners was not enough to alter the outcome. The Red Army advanced with overwhelming numbers and artillery support that blanketed the battlefield before every attack. Yet even Soviet field reports acknowledged the continued lethality of isolated German anti-tank teams. One report from the 5th Guards Tank Army noted, "Enemy guns remain dangerous at every range. They fire rarely, but always with effect. Psychologically, this persistence had an effect. Soviet tankers, though confident in their numerical superiority, approached German-held positions with caution. They advanced under smoke cover, fired preemptively into likely ambush sites, and avoided narrow roads where a single hidden gun could block an entire formation. The insane accuracy that had defined German gunnery in 1943 now served as a ghost of fear in 1945, a deterrent born from reputation more than numbers. As the city of Berlin itself turned into a labyrinth of debris and fire, precision shooting took on new forms. Anti-tank teams used basements and sewers for firing positions, sometimes targeting tanks from below street level. The geometry of gunnery changed. Angles, ricochets, and timing replaced range and optics. Even so, the discipline remained. Gunners who had once calculated distance in kilometers now judged it by the width of a street or the height of a doorway. Captured after the war, Soviet ordnance experts studied the aftermath of these engagements. They found T-34s destroyed by hits that struck within inches of known weak points, evidence of deliberate, not random fire. The precision of the German gunner had endured to the final hours, even when it no longer mattered. In the ruins of Europe, the doctrine of one-shot accuracy died alongside the army that had created it. But the techniques, ranging by eye, controlling breath, predicting motion, survived in manuals, post-war training programs, and eventually the study of human-machine coordination that would define the next generation of armored warfare. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, the art of precision gunnery that had defined the German Panzerwaffe came to an abrupt end. The men who had practiced it either lay buried on the eastern plains or sat in prisoner camps, their experience soon to be scattered and forgotten. Yet for military historians and post-war engineers, their methods left behind a blueprint of discipline, optics, and psychological control that would influence armored warfare for decades. Captured German documents, range tables, site calibration manuals, and after-action reports were studied intensively by Allied ordnance experts. The Americans and British noted how German training had fused mechanical understanding with instinctive judgment. Every gunner was not just a trigger puller, but a ballistic computer, capable of translating distance, motion, and terrain into one perfect shot. The Allies would later apply these lessons in developing early fire control computers and optical rangefinders during the 1950s. Post-war analysis at the British School of Tank Technology revealed that, statistically, German gunners maintained a first-shot hit probability of nearly 60% within 1,000 meters, double that of comparable Soviet crews. This advantage came from two factors: superior optics and better fire discipline. Where Soviet doctrine relied on massed fire and aggressive closing, German tactics emphasized patience, precision, and using every shot to maximum effect. The one-shot kill stories that survived the war, the moments when a single round from a PAK-40 or a Kebadiodo K-40 destroyed a T-34 in full motion, were not myths. They were the logical end of a system that rewarded control and punished haste. Even under total collapse, when fuel, ammunition, and morale were exhausted, the structure of that system held together. Crews were still aligning sights, checking wind, and waiting for the fraction of a second when the target angle was perfect. For the Soviet side, these encounters became cautionary tales. Post-war Red Army studies concluded that the psychological impact of facing accurate enemy fire was as damaging as the physical losses themselves. Soviet tankers described German gunners as invisible and merciless, capable of striking before their own guns were even aimed. The legend of the one perfect shot entered both sides' histories, one as a symbol of skill, the other as a reminder of vulnerability. In the decades that followed, this doctrine of precision evolved into modern concepts of fire control and first-round hit probability. The cold calculation of distance and trajectory was replaced by electronics and sensors, but the underlying philosophy remained the same. The most effective weapon is the one that never needs to fire twice. Today, the remnants of those weapons, rusting PAK-40s and shattered T-34s, rest in museums and fields across Europe. The optics, though clouded by time, still reveal the meticulous craftsmanship that gave those wartime gunners their deadly edge. Each lens and calibration mark tells a story of a system built not on luck, but on the pursuit of technical perfection amid chaos. The tale of the German gunner's insane aim was not about madness at all. It was about mastery, the fusion of human instinct with mechanical precision. And though the war that forged it ended in ruin, the principle it proved endures in every tank site, every guided shell, and every marksman's creed that still whispers the same words across generations. One shot, one kill. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more World War II stories.